Today, I want to tell you guys about a Somali pirate attack that was caught on camera and made headlines in America for months. It even made a movie that I would rate 4 out of 5 stars. And that's for Tom Hanks. So anyway, the story. Seriously, no one could believe their eyes when they saw what went down. In fact, maybe you've heard of it? You ever hear about the time Somali pirates hijacked a US-flagged cargo ship and got outsmarted by the crew? Yeah, it sounds like complete fiction right now, but it really happened back in April 2009. Let me show you. The ship was the Maersk Alabama, and it was on its way from Oman to Kenya when it ran into some serious trouble. 4 Somali pirates showed up out of literally nowhere, armed with AK-47s, looking to score a ransom. What they didn't count on was the sheer determination of the crew or the hair's-width precision of the U.S. Navy SEALs. So here's how it all went down. It's April 7th, and the Maersk Alabama is cruising a few hundred miles off the Somali coast. Now, if you know anything about that area, you'd know it was basically pirate central at the time. Or maybe you're too young to know this. Anyway, the captain, Richard Phillips, had gotten warnings about possible attacks, but he kept the ship on course anyway. That night, some suspicious boats got a little too close for comfort, but nothing came of it. Just a false alarm. Or so they thought. The next morning, though, that scene was a whole different story. A speedboat comes tearing toward the ship, carrying 4 pirates who were locked and loaded. The crew, completely unarmed, did everything they could to keep them off, firing off flares, blasting them with fire hoses, the whole works. But 2 of the pirates still managed to climb aboard, making them the first pirates to step foot on a US-flagged ship in over 200 years. Yeah, not exactly a record you want to break. Now, the crew wasn't about to go down without a fight. They quickly disabled the ship and retreated to the steering room, leaving Phillips and a few others trapped on the bridge. The other 2 pirates made it on board around this time, and things got even more intense. At one point, a crew member was sent to round up the others below deck, but never came back. So a pirate went down to check, only to get ambushed and taken hostage himself. A little back and forth negotiating led to an exchange of captives, but the pirates weren't done yet. They grabbed Phillips and forced him into one of the ship's lifeboats, demanding $2 million to let him go. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew, having gotten the Alabama up and running again, started tailing the tiny 18-foot lifeboat. A distress signal had already gone out, and by April 9th, the USS Bainbridge, a U.S. Navy destroyer, showed up, soon joined by more ships and aircraft. The Alabama was ordered to continue its journey with a military escort, leaving Phillips floating in a tiny, enclosed lifeboat with 4 very desperate and heavily armed pirates. And let me tell you, things only got more intense from there for this poor guy. But don't worry, there's a happy ending coming. On April 10th, Phillips made a daring escape attempt, jumping overboard to swim for safety. But before he could make it far, the pirates dragged him back in at gunpoint. Negotiations weren't going anywhere, so the Navy decided to send in the big guns, SEAL Team 6. Yeah, the same guys who would take out Osama bin Laden just a couple of years later. How important do you have to be for the government to authorize an operation like that just to save your life? The team arrived on April 11th, ready to end this standoff one way or another. That day, the pirates let the Bainbridge attach a tow rope to their lifeboat, supposedly to help keep it stable in the rough seas. But the real reason the Navy offers this? The team was slowly reeling the pirates in, bringing them closer into sniper range. The pirates, already exhausted and running low on cat, which is a plant they chewed to stay alert and fight off seasickness, by the way, didn't seem to notice what was happening. Then came April 12th, the day everything went down. One of the pirates, clearly realizing the whole situation was spiraling out of control, surrendered and was taken aboard the Bainbridge for medical treatment. He would obviously later go to jail. Later that day, the other 3 were seen pointing a gun at Phillips. That was all the SEAL snipers needed. In a synchronized shot, they took out all 3 pirates in a split second. Just like that, Phillips was safe and the hijacking was over. Of course, when the dust settled, there was some controversy. Phillips was hailed as a hero, but some crew members claimed he had ignored warnings and put them in danger. They even sued Maersk, the company that owned the Alabama, and settled for an undisclosed sum. Still, the hijacking changed the way cargo ships operated. Many started hiring armed security teams, and pirate attacks in the area dropped dramatically. Phillips later wrote a book about his ordeal, A Captain's Duty, which Hollywood turned into the 2013 film Captain Phillips, starring none other than Tom Hanks. And honestly, if you ever watch it, just know that while it's packed with drama, the real-life version was just as wild, maybe even more so. I mean, Navy SEAL snipers, pirate hijackers, a daring escape attempt. You can't make this stuff up. And when I tell you this story is still brought up again and again today, I mean it. But obviously, this isn't the only insane thing that's happened in the middle of the ocean. That place is a hotbed for these crazy events, and only some of them get to be caught on camera. You know, given how huge and uncharted the sea is. So today, I'm also going to be telling you about some other insane events that once again occurred on the deep blue. I cannot believe this footage. The U.S. Navy straight up dropped a 40,000-pound bomb in the ocean. On purpose. And the explosion was so powerful, it registered as a 3.9 magnitude earthquake. Yeah, an actual earthquake caused by man-made activities. I don't know what I expected, but watching that massive wall of water shoot into the sky like some apocalyptic geyser? Absolutely insane. So here's why they did it, before y'all rush to cancel our boys in the camo. The Navy was testing the USS Gerald R. Ford, a $13 billion aircraft carrier, because, you know, gotta make sure it can handle a little combat. They basically parked this beast off the coast of Florida, set off a massive underwater explosion just a few meters away, and let the shockwave do its thing. And trust me, it did its thing. The footage is unreal. 1 second, calm ocean. The next, boom, water shooting up like a mini tsunami. The force of that blast? Enough to shake the seafloor so hard it got picked up by earthquake monitors. I mean, when was the last time you heard of a warship test causing an earthquake? The Navy calls these shock trials, and apparently, this is just the first one for this ship. The last time they did something like this was back in 2016. But this was on another level. They're basically stress testing the Gerald R. Ford to make sure it can handle a full-scale battlefield situation. Because, you know, warships kinda need to survive explosions. I can't lie, I was half expecting the ship to tip over or something. But nope, that thing is built like a tank. Still, I can't wrap my head around the fact that we're out here detonating bombs just for fun. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis might be one of the most terrifying survival stories I've ever heard. And trust me, I've heard a lot. You survive a shipwreck only to find yourself floating in the middle of the Pacific, completely exposed, with no food, no fresh water, and, oh yeah, hundreds of sharks circling you. Sounds like hell, right? Well, for the men of the Indianapolis, this was their brutal reality. It all started on July 30th, 1945, when a Japanese submarine fired 2 torpedoes straight into the ship's hull. The explosion tore through the vessel, and within 12 minutes, it was gone. Just like that. Around 300 sailors went down with the ship, but about 900 were left stranded in the water, with nothing but their life vests and whatever debris they could cling to. Now, you'd think the US Navy would immediately send help. But here's the kicker. The Indianapolis had been on a top-secret mission delivering parts for the atomic bomb, and its movements were kept under wraps. No one even realized it was missing. At first, the survivors' biggest concerns were dehydration, exhaustion, and the scorching sun. But then, the sharks came. And when I say sharks, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 curious fish. I'm talking about swarms of oceanic white-tip sharks, some of the most aggressive open-water predators out there. At first, they circled, testing the waters. Then, the attacks began. Survivors described seeing fins slicing through the waves, men suddenly yanked underwater, and the sea turning red. Some sailors, already weak or delirious, drifted away from their groups and became easy targets. Others tried to stay as still as possible, praying the sharks wouldn't notice them. But it didn't matter. The sharks were relentless. For nearly 4 days, these men endured what can only be described as a waking nightmare. By the time help finally arrived, only 316 of the original 900 were still alive. The rest had either succumbed to the elements or been taken by the sea's most violent predators. The story of the Kaz 2 is one of those real-life mysteries that just messes with your head. I mean, how does a boat just show up, perfectly intact, with no one on board? No signs of struggle, no distress calls, just gone. It's like the Twilight Zone or something out here. So here's what happened. In April 2007, 3 friends, Derek Batten and brothers Peter and James Tunstead, set off from Airlie Beach, Australia, on what was supposed to be a dream sailing trip along the coast. They had experience, they had a solid catamaran, and they had no reason to think anything would go wrong. But just 3 days later, their boat, the Kaz 2, was spotted drifting near the Great Barrier Reef. When authorities boarded, what they found was downright eerie. The engine was running, a laptop was open, a half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the table. Fishing lines were still cast out into the water. It was like the crew had just stepped away for a second, but they hadn't. They were gone, and they were never seen again. Now, I don't know about you, but my brain immediately starts spinning in situations like this. Pirates, a rogue wave, a sea monster. Okay, maybe not a sea monster, but you get the idea. The official theory is that one of the guys was trying to free a tangled fishing line, maybe slipped overboard, and the others, in a frantic attempt to save him, got swept away one by one. But there's a problem with that. These guys weren't amateurs. They knew better than to all jump in without a safety line. And the fact that nobody made a distress call, that just adds another layer of weirdness. Some folks think freak weather played a role. There were reports of sudden strong winds that day, and maybe the boat lurched at just the wrong moment. One second they were all on deck, and the next, the ocean had swallowed them up. But the strangest thing? The Kaz 2 itself was completely fine. No damage, no sign of panic, just an empty boat floating silently, as if nothing had happened. To this day, no one really knows what went down on the Kaz 2. All I know is, if I ever set sail, I'm keeping my life vest on and my radio close, because the ocean doesn't give second chances. Up next, the time a massive cruise just randomly lost power. Cruise ships are supposed to glide through the ocean like floating hotels, not get stuck like a beached whale. But that's exactly what happened to the Norwegian Dawn near Bermuda, and I can only imagine the uh-oh moment on board when it hit the channel bed. So here's the deal. This massive cruise ship, packed with over 3,700 people, was just leaving King's Wharf when it suddenly lost power. No power meant no propulsion, and without that, the ship wasn't going anywhere. Instead, it drifted straight into the seabed. I don't know about you, but if I were on board, I'd be clutching my drink and wondering if I'd accidentally booked the Titanic experience. Like, look at this footage. These people were freaking out and praying to every god known to man. No thanks. Luckily though, no one was hurt, and the ship wasn't taking on water, so the empath in you can chill out now. Basically, according to the Norwegian Cruise Line, the power outage was only temporary. But by then, the damage had been done. Literally. The ship was stuck. Crew members had to hop into a small boat to check things out, while passengers stayed relatively calm. Which, let's be honest, probably means nervously downing pina coladas at the bar. Authorities confirmed that the Norwegian Dawn was stable, and the water around it wasn't polluted, so at least there wasn't an environmental disaster. But the big question was, now what? Would the ship continue its journey, or would thousands of passengers need to figure out a plan B? For a ship that's nearly 1,000 feet long and weighs 92,000 tons, being grounded in the middle of paradise wasn't exactly part of the itinerary. It's one thing to enjoy a tropical cruise. It's another to be parked in the ocean with no way out. Now, let's step into the world of the uber-rich and celebrate their losses. Can you believe this ship was shipping nearly 4,000 luxury cars across the ocean, only to have the whole thing go up in flames? That's exactly what happened to the Felicity Ace, a massive cargo ship that turned into a floating inferno in February 2022. If I were one of the folks waiting for my brand new Porsche or Bentley, I'd probably still be crying. So, here's how it all went down. The Felicity Ace was cruising across the Atlantic, carrying a jaw-dropping lineup of high-end cars, Porsches, Bentleys, Audis, even some Lamborghinis. This wasn't just any shipment. We're talking millions of dollars in vehicles making their way from Germany to the US. But on February 16th, disaster struck. A fire broke out somewhere on board. And trust me, a fire on a cargo ship is pretty much a worst-case scenario. Once the flames took hold, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy fix. The crew, thankfully, was safely evacuated, but the ship was left to drift, burning in the middle of the ocean. For days, fireboats and rescue teams tried to get things under control, but with so many electric vehicles on board, the lithium-ion batteries just kept the fire going. If you've ever seen a battery fire, you know those things don't go out easily. By February 25th, the Felicity Ace was officially doomed. It was abandoned and left smoldering until, finally, on March 1st, it sank into the depths of the Atlantic, taking every last luxury car with it. Gone. Just like that. Millions of dollars in high-end vehicles now resting on the ocean floor, probably making some fish feel really fancy. And just to twist the knife a little more, a year later, car prices were still sky high, partly thanks to this disaster. So if you were wondering why that Porsche you wanted was ridiculously expensive, well, blame the Felicity Ace. Yeah, I was pissed when I found out too. Not that I can even afford one. If there's one thing I never expected to lose, it's an entire ship. But that's somehow what happened with the Luba Vorlova, a Soviet-era cruise liner turned ghost ship that just vanished. And to make things even weirder, people think it might have been crawling with cannibal rats. Yeah, you heard that right. This all started back in 2010, when the Luba Vorlova, once a proud Arctic cruise ship, ended up abandoned in Canada. The ship had been seized in St. John's, Newfoundland, after its owners couldn't pay their debts. So there it sat, rusting away at the dock for 2 years, probably wondering what it did to deserve such a fate. Then in 2013, someone had the bright idea to tow it out to sea and scrap it. Simple enough, right? I thought the same. Well, apparently not really. Because the second the Luba Vorlova was on its way, the tow line snapped. Just like that, it was adrift, totally out of control in the North Atlantic. The Canadian government basically shrugged and said, "Not our problem," since it was now in international waters. And so, the Luba Vorlova was left to do whatever abandoned ships do: float aimlessly and freak everyone out if they dare to set sail on their private yacht. For a while, satellite images kept spotting it drifting, a massive rust bucket just wandering the ocean. But then, poof, it disappeared. No wreckage, no distress signals, nothing. Some say it eventually sank, but no one actually knows. And that's where the whole cannibal rat thing comes in. People started speculating that if the ship was still out there, it might be home to a colony of rats, surviving by, well, eating each other. I can't decide if that's terrifying or just plain disgusting. To this day, the Luba Vorlova has never been officially found. Maybe it's at the bottom of the ocean, or maybe it's still drifting somewhere, waiting to crash onto some unsuspecting shore. And if it ever does, you can bet I'll be watching from a safe distance, just in case those rats have developed a taste for something other than each other. Now let's circle to the year we got our coveted COVID-19 pandemic. In February 2020, a 44-year-old ghost ship, the MV Alta, just washed up near Ballycotton, Ireland, after floating around the Atlantic for nearly a year and a half with nobody on board. No crew, no distress signals, no explanation, just this eerie, rusting hulk appearing out of nowhere, like something straight out of a horror movie. Turns out, this ship had been abandoned way back in 2018, after breaking down in the middle of the ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard rescued the 10 crew members, leaving the vessel to drift aimlessly. And drift it did. The only time anyone spotted it was in 2019 near Bermuda, when the British Royal Navy randomly came across it. But no one bothered to recover it, so it just kept floating. For months. Then, in 2020, a massive storm smashed it into the Irish coastline, where it finally ran aground. Authorities were stunned. I mean, obviously, what else would they be? This wasn't just some forgotten fishing boat. This thing had changed names and flags so many times that people started suspecting it had been used for shady dealings. Smuggling, illegal operations. Who knows? Even its tracking system, the AIS, had been turned on and off at random intervals, which is a classic trick used by smugglers. And yet, no one stepped forward to claim it. With no owner, the Irish government had no choice but to take over under the Salvage and Wreck Act of 1993. They sent teams in to check for environmental risks and found 62 barrels of oil still on board, which were quickly removed by helicopter before anything disastrous could happen. They also sealed off the area. But let's be real, people couldn't resist sneaking up to see the ghost ship for themselves. By late 2020, storms had beaten the wreck even further, raising concerns it might break apart. Cork County Council debated removing it, but it was expensive and risky. By 2023, storms had finally split the ship in half, and officials decided it was safer to leave it where it was, rather than risk a dangerous removal. So now, what's left of the Alta just sits there, slowly disappearing into the sea. One of the strangest maritime mysteries I've ever heard of. Now a somewhat heartwarming ocean story to top off all the sad and horrible ones. A family stranded on a broken-down sailboat with a sick baby had to be rescued by the U.S. Navy and Air National Guard in an operation that made global headlines 11 years ago. This is the story of the Kaufman family back in April 2014. And honestly, it's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if the ocean just has a personal vendetta against some people. So Charlotte and Eric Kaufman, a couple from California, decide they're going to sail around the world with their 2 little daughters, 3-year-old Cora and 1-year-old Lyra. Sounds like a dream, right? Sunsets on the open sea, dolphins swimming alongside the boat, that kind of thing. Well, not so fast. 2 weeks into their journey, they're already 900 miles off the coast of Mexico when things start going downhill fast. First, their boat, the Rebel Heart, starts having mechanical problems. Not ideal when you're in the middle of nowhere. But the real nightmare? Baby Lyra gets seriously sick. High fever, strange rash. Just all around bad news. Out at sea, with no doctor, no hospital, and their boat barely holding together. They're completely stuck. That's when they send out a distress signal. And let me tell you, when the US military decides to show up, they don't mess around. A California Air National Guard team literally parachutes into the ocean to reach them. Like actual Navy SEAL movie-level stuff. They stabilize Lyra while waiting for backup, and soon enough, a full-on Navy warship, the USS Vandergrift, shows up to rescue them. The Kaufmans and their kids are lifted off the sinking boat, and just like that, their dream voyage is over. Sadly, their beloved Rebel Heart, left to sink into the Pacific. Years of planning, their floating home, just gone. Of course, once the story hit the news, everyone had an opinion. Some people felt bad for them. Others absolutely ripped them apart, calling them reckless for bringing babies on such a risky trip. The Kaufmans defended themselves, saying they were experienced sailors. But let's be real, this was not how they imagined their journey going. In the end, they made it back to California, shaken but safe. And now their experience makes for a great story. Worked out for me. So, which of these sea disasters freaked you out the most? Are you a frequent sailor? Let me know in the comments if you've had any crazy experiences just like these.